walk in with a portfolio, walk in with an investor deck, walk in with a video that sets you apart and shows your capability. You're not just walking in saying, I'm really interested in employment in your company. I think instead you're walking in with a sort of a features and benefits statement. I noticed that your company is really focused on this thing. I am an expert in banana peels and have all of these different portfolio applications of banana peels. And I feel that here are the benefits that I could bring you from an employment perspective. I could manage projects, and you really need to, instead of just doing the classic, I'm looking for employment and dropping a generic resume, you need to really think like the people that you're trying to work for.
Welcome to episode 11 of the FoodGrads podcast, the podcast where we explore the fascinating career paths of professionals in the food, beverage, and hospitality industries. I'm your host, Veronica, a molecular science graduate student and career partner with FoodGrads. I am super excited to share this week's podcast because I am talking with Dr. Amy Proux, the academic program coordinator of Culinary Innovation and Food Technology at Niagara College. I am a huge fan of Amy and everything that she does, so I was so excited to sit down with her for an hour and listen to her story. She's a wonderful person who cares so much about the food industry and the students that she teaches. She's one of those super networkers that seem to appear in almost every conversation because people just love her so much, and understandably so. She's done so much to advocate for this industry and to get people excited about coming into the food industry. In this episode, we learn about Amy's career path from undergraduate degree to PhD and how, after graduating, she made her own job position during the 2008 recession period in Canada, something that somewhat mirrors what we're going through right now. Using it as an inspiration, I thought this was a great chance to ask Amy about what students can do to get a job currently during the COVID pandemic. Finally, we talk about networking and all the amazing opportunities which can come from joining associations like CIFST and FoodGrads if you're a student. Students, this is a must-listen to episode because Amy gives so much tangible advice that you can use at every stage of your career, no matter if you're a college graduate or if you're a university graduate, or none at all. So I'm so excited to share this episode. Let's just jump right into it.
Okay, I guess we'll get started. So
sure. No, I think I have a good understanding of what's going down, and you know already I am your biggest fan. So everything that you and Nicole are doing with FoodGrads is so valuable to the industry, and I am a big fan and booster of all of the messages that you're putting out there.
Well, I'm excited to have you on the show, Amy, because I'm a fan of you, and like your name comes up everywhere when I'm talking to students. They just rave about Niagara College and how you've been really, not just from a schooling perspective in the terms of like teaching academically, but from a networking, as a mentor, as someone who just advocates on their behalf, as someone who they look up to. And so I'm excited, and I'm kind of sad I never got to go to Niagara College because I've heard so many great things about it. I'm excited.
I always laugh and say my Niagara College family is my first family, but the food science network that I have is my other family. Obviously, my husband will laugh when he hears that. But the reason I met my husband was because of my food science family. And many people know Hamid Ali from Ingredient. It was Hamid's roommate that I ended up marrying. Hamid and I were classmates.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny.
And I met his roommate. And so many of the conversations when we're getting together as friends converge to food science because so many of our friends came from the food science community.
The food industry is just so interconnected. So
in Canada, oftentimes it's the largest, but it flip-flops with automotive as the largest manufacturing sector, and it employs over 250,000 people. But at the same time, most of us who are in R&D and in the food science network community, so CIFST, FoodGrads, these are communities that really focus on the networking and human connection of the food and science community. And so we sincerely know everybody. And that is amazing to think about, that And I encourage people when they're out doing job searching to connect with some of these organizations like FoodGrads or CIFST, because inevitably you connect with us and we likely know almost every company that's out there. And if we don't know the company, we can find someone who does.
I guess this is a good point. Before we dive back into the organizations that are in the local region, we've kind of overlooked talking about you. And I think that our listeners would like to know a little bit about you and your journey into becoming a professor at Niagara College. So could you give a little bit of a story of how that happened?
So going way, way back, I grew up in rural Ontario in a town called Dorchester. And I actually didn't grow up in town. I grew up out in an agricultural space. And I was always involved in agriculture and food in some form. But when I got to high school, I kept thinking, well, gee, I would really love to be a chef. I love cooking. It's so much fun. And my guidance counselor said, no, you are going to be an engineer. And I happened to apply to engineering streams at a few different universities. And I ended up at the University of Guelph just as the food engineering department was making some changes in the 1990s. And we all ended up in food science. And honestly, it was so phenomenal. I really had not heard about food science when I was in high school. And I was so, so fortunate to land exactly where I needed to be with a community of people that really fostered the interest that I had in food, but allowed me to blossom with my science background. And from there, I worked at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada as a technician for a period. And when I was doing my product development course in my graduating year, I happened to have Don Murray as my teacher. Don Murray at the time was the CEO of the Guelph Food Technology Center. And he encouraged us to just go and be really out of the box thinking. And I had been thinking about some protein, just hanging out on the picnic table with some of my friends and roommates. And they were in biochemistry and talking about this protein that they were researching. And I was like, that's a really cool protein. I think it has some interesting function. And I worked on that protein for my product development project, really early technology readiness level. And Don Murray, fortunately, was really an out of the box thinker and said, run with it. I was really fortunate that that protein was a soy-based protein called soy leg hemoglobin, and the constellations collided, and the Hannum Fund, the Soy Utilization Fund, founded by Peter Hannum, opened up at the same time. And I was able to go and raise money to fund my own master's program because I wrote a grant proposal as my product development project. And so almost $100,000 later, and I was able to complete my master's. I did my PhD in interdisciplinary graduate studies in food and nutrition science at Iowa State University. And how did I end up at Iowa State? Going to a conference, and I gave my presentation on the soy leg hemoglobin, and a gentleman walked up to me, you'll laugh when I say this, but in a bar after the session, and I didn't know who he was. And he said, that was a really interesting paper. Would you be interested in possibly joining my team of graduate students and returning back to Iowa State University at the closing of the conference, and we'll get you back home. Don't worry about that. I go and call my mom, and my mom's, what the heck? You met a man in a bar and he's taking you to Iowa. You are, and you could just hear the anguish. And my supervisor for my master's was Dr. Yukio Kakuda, who is since retired, but at the University of Guelph. And Yukio Kakuda said to me, do you know who this gentleman is? And I'm like, no, I really don't. This is before smartphones. And he said, you do realize it's Larry Johnson, the president of the AOCS, the American Oil Chemist Society.
I'm very familiar with them.
And so I did hop the van. I did 5 years at Iowa State and graduated. And I happened to graduate just in December of 2007. And my graduation is, it's a special day for me because I happened to walk across the stage with a small squirmy baby in my arms. And so my graduation from my PhD and my graduation into motherhood started at the exact same time. And
Wow.
as you can guess, 2007 turns into 2008. I took some time with my small baby at home and to just decompress after this. At this point, we had moved to Toronto, and 2008 happened. And this is, I think, a really good story for people who are in job search right now to hear, because 2008 was the most recent major economic recession that had the same sort of scope as what we're seeing right now in terms of economic downturn. And I applied for lots of different jobs all over the Toronto area, and one by one those jobs evaporated because the economic situation was turning sour within so many different companies, within so many different post-secondary institutions, and no one was getting hired. And it was just so frustrating. And I really feel when the students and recent graduates who come out and reach out to me and trust me with their conversations say, it's so frustrating. And I'm like, I know that feeling. And that's why I believe in the power of networking and believe that I'm committed to helping as many people who reach out to me as possible, because I needed that 12, 13 years ago. And it was really fortunate. I was able to end up working as an NSERC research fellow at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada in Guelph, and worked there with Dr. Rong Chow for a couple of years. And then at the same time, the listeria crisis happened at the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, and some opportunities came for me to transfer to the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. So I ended up working at the hub of the listeria crisis and work with the Auditor General's team for reviewing the implementation of the new listeria policy and so on. I loved working for the inspection agency, but I knew I was a serial entrepreneur and an ideas person. And it just happened, again, one of those networking situations. I was at a party and I was there with Jeff Stewart. Many people who are with the food industry may know Anita Stewart, who just passed away last week. She was Order of Canada and one of Canada's most active food advocates and activists, and Guelph's food laureate, received an honorary doctorate from the University of Guelph in food studies. And her son was at that party. And we were off in the corner chatting about what the environment for food studies was like. And at that time, Jeff Stewart was working at Niagara College. And he said, you should come on down. Just come on down for the day. I think you'll have some fun. And I came down and met lots of great people. And we had some really good conversations about what would really good food science education look like in Ontario. And we wrote some proposals together, and that included an academic program proposal, as well as a proposal for the Technology Access Center. At the time, it was called the College and Community Innovation Fund with NSERC, and it's now what's called the Technology Access Center with NSERC. And so I worked with the Niagara College group, just sort of flying by the seat of our pants at the time, and we wrote up those proposals. I wrote them off the side of my desk. And those of you who are listening from the inspection agency, yeah, I was multitasking a little bit, but wrote those proposals and ended up being offered the inaugural position to be the first food scientist at Niagara College. And I'm almost 10 years in now.
Wow.
Long story.
It's well, of course. I mean, there's been so many twists and turns, and we're not talking about 1 year, we're talking about your career. So it makes sense that there's a lot going on there. And wow, it's amazing how you've been able to see opportunities and take them, because, with someone coming up to you randomly at a bar and proposing to, it wasn't probably in your thought process to go, maybe at that time, to go to those different destinations, because we get so caught up in school sometimes that you're like, when I graduate, I find that there's two types of people when you're going to school. You have the people that don't have a clue what they're going to do when they graduate. And then you have the people that are very dead set on going on a certain path. And both, if you're passionate about going with a certain path, that's great. But sometimes just looking for opportunities as they come about is an exciting way to go about going forward in your career. And it's certainly one that I'm trying to do right now, because when I had originally wanted to go into food science, I was dead set on being a product developer personally. When I graduated from high school, I didn't get into a food science program. So I went to Ryerson for chemistry because, to be honest, they accepted me. That's one of the only reasons I went, and it was local. So when I was going through school, I was determined I was going to go into R&D, and that's the thing I wanted to do. But as I started to learn more about the industry and being involved with FoodGrads and such, I realized that there's just so much more to it as well. So with your career journey, it sounds as though you were really open to different experiences and trying new things, and that's pretty cool.
I think you hit on a really important point, that it's important to have some focus to your goals so that you remain intent and you remain with a sense of purpose. When you don't know what you want to do, it's hard to have that focus and remain dedicated. But at the same time, if you're too focused, it can become really frustrating and disappointing when your plans don't work. And honestly, I don't know very many people who have had every single plan of theirs come off without a hitch. There's constantly Murphy's Law and Goldrat's constraints. I'm a big fan of Eliyahu Goldrat and his theory of constraints. And those constraints come up all the time. And we have to constantly persevere and be open to flexibility, but not lose focus.
Yeah, I agree, because I think with so many roles that there are out there, you don't know that they exist, and you might not know that they are something that you're well suited for, and you won't know until you try. So it's important to have as many conversations as you can with others, and that's how you start to establish these opportunities.
Exactly. And I keep reflecting on my own personal experience of how I fell into food science. We know it's one of the most important manufacturing sectors in the country, and we need all sorts of different people to participate in this process, from food scientists to general labor to trades to business specialists, logistics, and so on. I am really fortunate that I'm in a college situation, but I'm in a really privileged situation in my role with CIFST and Food Processing Skills Canada on their boards, that I have a bit of a megaphone that I can use to promote careers, not just for Niagara College and recruit for my own programs selfishly. I can go out and encourage people into careers across the board, both for Niagara College and all of the different platforms, but also just go out and say, I want to see people in the right fit succeeding, because when they're succeeding, we are all succeeding. And so I go out and often speak about the other great programs that are out there, such as Conestoga or Guelph or Ryerson or Durham College. So many really important programs, each with a unique angle and perspective on how they teach food science. And I want to make sure that the students who get into those programs are in the right fit, because when they're in the right fit, they're going to be motivated to succeed. And that right fit could be academic, but it could also be the economics of it. If I have to move away from home, is it going to cost me a lot and I'm going to be stressed because I have to have a part-time job or so many student loans? Or am I going to be challenged enough, or am I going to be overwhelmed and perhaps want to go stepwise by starting at a college program and then looking at transferring into a university stream, or vice versa, start in university, but then come to college to get some really hands-on practical applications for the learning. So many different pathways to take. As long as I always joke with the students and say, first and foremost, walk into the classroom as a functioning human being, then walk in as a functioning student, then walk in as a functioning food scientist. You can't be a good food scientist if you're not a good human being today. So that aspect of being a good human being sometimes comes down to motivation. It sometimes comes down to socioeconomics or general mental health. All these other things are so important too.
I agree. And I think that you pointed out another good thing that I wanted to stress as well is finding the right fit, but also making best of your situation with again, because the food industry has so many different, especially food science, you listed off some great programs like you said, Conestoga, Ryerson, Guelph. These are all different places with different ways that they go about teaching food science, but they all have their own. They're all essentially teaching these careers and focus on learning these interdisciplinary places. But I think that it's from the more that I've talked to a lot of individuals is that everyone's path is different, and that you can, if you make the best out of the experience that you have at the current school you are, you can create something that's great coming out. Because from what I've talked to, there's people from Niagara who are doing product development, but I've also met people who are from Ryerson who's done product development, but there's also people from the University of Guelph. There's so many opportunities to make the best of your college and university experiences that you shouldn't be as focused sometimes as the school that you're at, in my opinion, but finding a way to make it fit for you. And that's something that I've come to the conclusion about. I'm not sure if you feel the same, but.
Oh, no, absolutely. As much as the doors get opened by your school, really a lot of it comes from your own hustle and your own drive to succeed. And we have students who have come into our program at Niagara College. I often think of some of the students who have done really amazing things. In many cases, they've come from really alternative career pathways. One of the students that I like to speak about, her name's Becky Griffin, and she happens to have come to the program at Niagara College in one of the earliest program offerings. I think she was actually in the first group. She had actually completed her culinary training and had been working as a cook in restaurants around the Niagara region. And she returned to school as a mature student and came into the program and just had so much hustle and drive and so much creative energy. We were able to hire her to work in our research center, and she was really finding her niche as a product developer in that space. She had her co-op at McCain in downtown Toronto, and she really was thriving there. And they offered to have her continue working part-time as she returned to school to complete her program. She then worked for McCain for a period of time and returned to Niagara College to work in our research division. After the end of her contract with the research division, it just happened that, again, through some network of friends that I have, some cannabis startups were happening, and she joined one of the cannabis startups and is now the chief formulation scientist for a cannabis co-packer called Molecule. And again, that college pathway linked with her drive and hustle. She's now leading teams of product formulators and working with clients across the country on product formulation. And it's such a great story.
That's so fun. And that's so cool to be able to have a career. That sounds so fulfilling, of a career path to go and find something that fits for you. So that's great. But I actually wanted to just pivot the conversation back a little more to your story, because I really was intrigued when Nicole posted a question on LinkedIn about, I believe it was a student that they graduated with a master's degree and they were having difficulties finding work. You had posted on that you had when you had graduated with your PhD, I know that I learned just a little bit more about that, but you had mentioned that you almost created your own role. And I wanted to kind of dive a little bit more into that to get you to explain what did that mean, because I think a lot of students from my personal network who are graduating, who are graduating with a master's degree are finding difficulties finding positions because they don't quite, they've been stuck in the academic role, so they haven't had that opportunity to work. So I was just curious about your experience.
So when I say create your role, often it comes with, how do you market yourself to employers? And in some cases, when you're going out and applying to different jobs, it's so easy to just fall in and talk about skills and competencies instead of, I want to say, using features and benefits, using marketing language to when I work with the college students, we often focus on portfolio development as a means of entering the job market in a very efficient way. And as a master's student, it's so challenging to look at your thesis and say, well, what is my portfolio? In many cases, your portfolio is all the things around you. You just have to repackage it. An employer isn't going to look at a master's thesis, but are there other spin-offs that you have done that show the alignment of your work to relevant industries? So, for example, have you written a plain language article about your topic? I know that the folks at some of the different food magazines, Kirsty Nuds at Food in Canada is always looking for really good content. And I bet if you reached out to her, she would be very delighted to get a really balanced article between the science of what you have been researching along with some good transferable knowledge over to the trade industry. That's one way of carving and showing your relevance. A master's thesis too gives you a really strong capability in project management. Are there other eminently linkable skills that you could quickly add to your resume and add to your portfolio? Things in project management or analytics or in data analysis or in programming. These are all extremely marketable skills. Another one is take a look at I can't stress this enough, take a look at the companies that you're applying for and understand their business situation. Oftentimes I'm reading the different trade magazines and newspapers looking for venture capital investment rounds. I'm looking at launches of new technology or launches of new products, because in many cases, people think of legacy companies as their first choice for employment. But many of the companies that are really out there growing aggressively and need technical and R&D specialists are not the name brand companies that you think of. They are often startups. They are often more aligned with venture capital. And so following some of the feeds like CS Wire or some of the venture capital forums, you can see what companies are going through different funding rounds and are aggressively growing. And that's a very different tactic than just going onto a job board like Indeed.
That's some great advice that I honestly had never considered, especially the last one you're mentioning, because go to where the money is, essentially, because they're exciting. They're the ones that are going to be revolutionizing changes. And if you can find, for a company like a startup, for example, that might be in these areas, or they're growing too fast, they might not know what they need at that. Like, they just know they need someone, but they don't know explicitly this defined role. They just want someone to grow with them.
Exactly. And a master's or a PhD is often so robustly trained that they have that leadership capability of going in and saying, here's how we're going to manage this aspect of getting to commercialization, or here's how we're going to manage researching the technical attributes of what we need to get to commercialization. That's a really useful skill set. And it's more challenging when PhDs are looking at legacy companies. When we're looking at some of these big companies, honestly, a lot of their innovation comes through mergers and acquisitions. And they're buying the small, innovative technologies that are being produced at startups. And so in some cases, they're buying the technology. In other cases, they're buying the team.
Huh. That's interesting. But now that you mention it, it makes sense now, because I'm just thinking about when you think of these larger companies, a lot of times when they're talking about their innovation of their core products, when they have core products, it takes a long time for innovation to happen. But I know that a lot of companies pick up other brands because then they can use their brand name under the merger to push these new innovative ideas. So yeah.
Exactly. I'm a huge fan of Maple Leaf Foods, and they're a great example where a lot of their plant-based portfolio came through mergers and acquisitions of smaller but really aggressive, innovative companies that have been doing plant-based for a period of time, they then merge that innovation into their own portfolio, and in some cases maintain it as an arm's length company. In other cases, they wrap it right into their portfolio, and as such, in some cases they're taking the intellectual property, in other cases they're taking the team, because the team is what's capable of doing that innovation.
So if we wanted to take this to more a tangible route, because I'm thinking you're saying to follow these acquisitions, follow these news places, how would you start to pivot to find jobs within these markets? Because I don't know if I'm not too familiar if startups post on Indeed. Would you just reach out to someone within the department? What would be a step if you were a new graduate or looking for a full-time job? What would you think would be the best method to reaching out to these newer startup companies?
I honestly think that you do reach out, but the challenge is that you don't want to reach out into the innovation space with that classic cover letter and resume. You want to walk in almost like an investment pitch. And walk in with a portfolio, walk in with an investor deck, walk in with a video that sets you apart and shows your capability. You're not just walking in saying, I'm really interested in employment in your company. I think instead you're walking in with a sort of a features and benefits statement. I noticed that your company is really focused on this thing, banana peels. My students will laugh when they hear me say banana peels, because that's my default answer for everything. I see you're working on commercializing applications for banana peels. You'll note I am an expert in banana peels and have all of these different portfolio applications of banana peels. And I feel that here are the benefits that I could bring you from an employment perspective. I could manage projects, and you really need to, instead of just doing the classic, I'm looking for employment and dropping a generic resume, you need to really think like the people that you're trying to work for. And so if you're in that startup space, they're so used to the pitch sort of environment, they're so used to the investor deck sort of environment, act like that.
That's a really interesting way to go about it, because I can't say for certain with other programs. I know from my personal experience that my school did, Ryerson's Career Center, you kind of have to go out of your way to kind of learn those other skills. Like, it's not taught in the core of my program, although Ryerson is my molecular science program is very strong at teaching you how to communicate your science and also give presentations. There's never really been a focus on business and such in the actual core course. You kind of have to go out of your way. And I know that Ryerson is trying to push that, but it sounds like the skills that you're saying are these that students should be thinking in a business mindset, because when you go into the working world, if you're not going into academia, a lot of the places that are hiring are these business places. So it would maybe make sense to start learning how to pitch yourself. I know that LinkedIn has some great courses, like free short ones that people could do. So they got to go with a business mindset, it sounds like.
Exactly. And be able to walk in with a clear opportunity that you're addressing by joining that organization. So for example, I walked into Niagara College and was able to say, here's a clear opportunity for academic programs. And I really doubled down and supported the development of the curriculum maps and the DACM planning, and made sure that my efforts would turn into the job that I wanted. As well, I went in and helped write the proposals for the Technology Access Center, and I did that on a volunteer basis. Now, I always caution students to really think, if you're going out of your way and doing volunteer work or pro bono work, make sure that there's going to be some sort of true reciprocal element to it. I see lots of recent grads say, oh, well, this company or this consulting group has reached out to me and said, hey, would I help out on this or that? And they'll do it for next to no money. I caution on that in that sometimes sometimes groups are offloading risk and they're offering it to junior level people to offload the risk and increase profitability, or offload the risk so that reputationally the consulting group or whatever doesn't have to take the hit. But in other times, it's just straight up exploitation. I can't put it nicer than that. And I want to make sure that if you're out there doing that sort of volunteering, that there's going to be some sort of reciprocal benefit from doing that. I knew that by going out and volunteering on writing that grant proposal, at the time I was still actively working on looking at academic teaching roles. And I knew that I'd be able to, irrespective of what happened, I'd be able to, on my resume, say I had written curriculum for Niagara College, I had written academic program proposals for Niagara College, and I had written grant proposals, major multi-million-dollar grant proposals with the Niagara College team. And I'd be able to own that on my resume. And to me, the net benefit was there for me to make that gamble and volunteer my time. In other cases, you've got to really be careful about that metric, about how much you gamble with your time to be able to get a net benefit.
Okay, so it really sounds that when you're going into these situations and when you're graduating, and you're just trying to find anything, sometimes just doing something is it sounds like the best thing to be doing, because even if you're making a little money, you might have to, but being able to really think about what you're going to get out of this opportunity. And although it sounds a little callous, being able to think, will I be able to show something when I get out of this experience? Can I put something that when I go to my next step, should this startup not be where I want to stay for these after this month? What can I put on my resume that explicitly shows something that you have proof of?
And especially in that early stage where you're still out scoping. When you're still out scoping, oftentimes you have to do a risk reward analysis on any sort of activity that you're doing. So for example, when people come and say, oh, I'm thinking about volunteering with FoodGrads, for example, I'm like, totally, absolutely, 100%. Why? Because I know that Nicole and you are out there absolutely enhancing the network and creating these opportunities that are of high value to the community in Canada. When people come and say, oh, well, this company has asked if I'd come and volunteer on a couple shifts at the company, I'm like, oh no, are they offering you a job, or are they paying you? And they're like, no, they've asked me to come and volunteer. And like, no, walk away. They should be paying you at least minimum wage if you're going in and physically working in a facility. And in other cases, people are being asked to do, I think about writing articles for some of the trade magazines. In my early career, I did write a lot more. I wrote for a few magazines. Prepared Foods out of BNP Media was one. And for me, I really enjoyed the process. I just like writing. And so for me, it was worthwhile. But I know other people who were approached and they were like, this is so much work and I hate it and I'm not getting paid. And everyone's risk reward metric is different for what they need to get out of it. For me, volunteering my time to write some articles was refreshing because I personally enjoy writing.
I'm learning something new, especially with the working a few shifts thing. That's something that, just to hear someone else say it, that's good. And I know with FoodGrads, I've personally helped out for so long. At the beginning, I was just a student and, I was just writing because I just wanted to try something. And I always stuck with it because I truly believed in Nicole, that I knew, and I've shown that FoodGrads has helped me. It's connected me to job interviews. I have something to show on my resume because, again, coming from just a pure chemistry degree, coming out of my undergraduate, I didn't have like the food science skills. Like I had the chemistry skills, but I didn't have much to show for it. So being able to write on my spare time, that was really great for me. And I wrote tons of articles on different jobs in the industry, and that allowed me to explore, and I could share my knowledge. I had something to show for. So I believe that writing's, for me, it's been great for me as well as podcasting. But I digress. But where I wanted to go with this conversation, because I know that we're coming close to the end of our conversation, but I wanted to get back into CIFST because I know that you have big involvement with them, and I wanted to learn more about them because from a student perspective, I'll be honest, I don't hear much about them. So I wanted to know more about CIFST and what they're doing for students.
So CIFST has a long history in Canada. It's one of the oldest food associations. It's what's called a peer-to-peer institute. And so its members are individuals. So individual people make up that membership. Other organizations such as Food and Beverage Canada or the Canadian Food Innovators Network, the membership is made up of companies, whereas CIFST, you elect to be a member individually. So CIFST was founded in 1951, and it was originally encouraged at the National Research Council. The NRC in the post-World War II era was saying, you know what, one of the important things that we noted during the war was the importance of the food manufacturing sector and the importance of science in its success. And as such, NRC encouraged the formation of the Canadian Institute of Food Science and Technology as a means of, if I can use the peer-to-peer networking. And the idea being getting together, sharing knowledge, and encouraging the success of the industry through collective action. So CIFST's purpose, we are out there advocating for quality and safety of the food supply, but also that knowledge transfer. So what do they do for students? Well, CIFST, as you can guess, was hit a bit by COVID. Normally, we would be doing some product development competitions and we would have some conferences, and we've been pivoting. Right now, we have been pivoting to a lot of online webinars. Throughout the summer, there were a wide variety of different academic and industry-focused webinars. And currently, there is a webinar series on commodities that's being hosted by CIFST Ontario. But members from across CIFST Canada can participate and attend the webinars or watch the recorded version. CIFST during normal period of time is known for networking events, and it's also known for hosting what are called the tabletop showcases across the country. And these are supplier showcases. So the big ingredient companies will come together, and it's almost, I was going to say it's almost like Halloween for food product developers. You walk in there with a bag and you say, I need to find some solutions for technical starch situations in the products that I'm working on. And you'll go off and find the great folks at Ingredient, or maybe you are looking for some shelf life enhancers and you go off and look for the good folks at Caldic, or you name the technical ingredient, you will go and find supplier who has a solution. And at the same time, you're making a human connection. And oftentimes, if you can't find what you're looking for, someone in that room knows what you're looking for and can help connect you to the right suppliers. As much as there's competition between the different suppliers to lock up different accounts, at the same time, there is that sense of network and community. And so many people have worked across the different networks of companies, and they may have been at one company at one point in time and then shifted careers and gone to another. We all know each other. When I normally would be able to take a busload of students with me to the CIFST tabletop in November, and we had a virtual tabletop last week, and it was a ton of fun. Not the same as going with the bus. And the students all laugh when they get there. They say, it's like your family reunion. You just go around and hug everyone and shake everybody's hands and everything. And I'm like, it's true though, because at some point I may have gone to school with this person, or I may have had business dealings with this person. And I may have been at the inspection agency and regulated that person, but always did it with a sense that I wanted the sector to improve. And you walk into the room and there's 2,500 people there, and you know half of them.
Oh, if that's not a reason to want to be someone in this industry, like I don't know what is personally. I would love to have a rich, long career where I can just show up and be that person in the room that half of them know. Like that sounds pretty fun and exciting. And it just makes me smile at I'm choosing this industry.
My favorite thing about going to tabletop, now that I went to my first tabletop when I was in my first year undergrad. And so I've been going to tabletop on and off for almost 25 years. And now when I take those students, I like to hear my students' stories and what they are interested in and what sort of companies they might be looking at joining. And because I walk into the room and I'm like, hey, Lewis, you told me that you were interested in finding out more about Brenntag, and Brenntag is a global ingredient supplier. Let's walk over to the Brenntag table together. Can I introduce you to some people and see if we can make a good connection? Or someone else might say, you know what, I'm really interested in joining the chocolate industry. And we go walking over to the Barry Kaibo table or the Blomers table, and we make some connections for that student to the chocolate industry. I think it's really powerful to be in that space where we all have the same goal, to see the Canadian food sector succeed. And it happens that our success is a human success. And so when each of us is succeeding individually, we're all succeeding together.
That's amazing. I think that is what defines the Canadian food industry. And I've been to CIFST. I've seen what you're talking about. It's exciting. It's seeing all these people. I've ran into people that I haven't. You always somehow always circle back to someone you met, like, or you've known through even my short little stint in the food industry. I've come across them, and it's so exciting to just catch up, say hi, and like the goal is, you're right. People just want to see food flourish in the Canadian industry. I mean, if people didn't want at the heart to help feed people and create like a better food system, I think that's why people go into the industry. So
it's got so much opportunity. Absolutely. You're feeding people. There's a satisfaction. My teenage kid, I graduated in late 2007. So she was a baby then. She's now 13. And she says, I hate grocery shopping with you. And I'm like, why? Grocery shopping is the best. And she's like, you just stop and you look at everything and you talk about the people. And you're like, you pick up a can of soup and you're like, oh, I worked with this person and they're the best. And then you go and pick up a piece of cheese and you're like, oh, this student made this cheese. And I'm like, it is. I close my eyes and I picture all of these amazing people.
And I think that's what the message we need to share more with everyone, not just people going into the industry, but people who are just like regular consumers who are buying for their families, that there's so many people involved in what they eat. And it's not just this machine made product. There's just so many people involved that's what the grocery store is. It's just like all these people that have worked together. And it's just stunning that we have a food system that we can do that. And there's so many people involved.
So many people. And at the same time, the community is so tight knit. And the pandemic just really heightened the importance of how our food manufacturing sector is an essential workforce. And because it's essential, we need people to be aware of it. We need people to value it. And we need people to join it.
We do. And we're coming. I'm going to be ending it off on that note. But before we go, I just wanted to ask you two more questions.
Sure.
And I think one of them is pretty obvious from our conversation, but I'm still going to ask it. What advice would you give students who would like to go into the food industry or have a career similar to yours?
Going into the industry, I want to remind people that there's so much diversity and so many different jobs that are out there. And you could be a food scientist and focus on food safety or product formulation or innovation. You could be honestly working with robots or engineering and mechanical. You could join the trades and be a welder. Honestly, I think some of the welders make more than the food scientists do because they're in such short supply. We need general laborers, and it's a great gateway for people who maybe are on the cusp and saying, you know what, I'm not sure what I want to do going out of high school, but I want to make some money and take some time and reflect. There are people who have grown with the industry going straight out of high school too. And maybe these are people who didn't see college or university in their pathway, but that's also there, and it's possible, and it's totally feasible to succeed. I do get a lot of people say, well, I have a PhD, how do I get into teaching? I wish I had a magic wand and would able to open up more food science programs across the country. Honestly, the chronic vacancy in food manufacturing is so acute. We need more trained food scientists as well as good general labor and good entry-level workers. Right now, the environment is such that it's still hard to attract people to those programs. If you have a good relationship with academic program, go out and use that same values approach. Can you carve a job for yourself? I happen to be in a really fortunate situation that the people around the entire team at Niagara College were so innovative and focused. Craig Udale, John O'Grislow, Jeff Stewart, Dan Patterson, these were all people who really had an innovative mindset, who wanted to see new opportunities take place. Find who those opportunities people are and go talk to them. Go talk to them about carving more, because opportunities people love to amplify and magnify a good opportunity. Phrase it and position it well so that you can go and pursue that opportunity. At the same time, still keep dabbling in other stuff so that you keep your options open.
Yeah, that's good advice. And that's great advice. What am I saying? That is great advice. And I think that I think our listeners will really get a lot of value out of this conversation, because I know I sure have. And I'm definitely leaving this, and I'm going to start thinking about what I'm doing in my thesis program right now. How can I make that into a value? How can I show my market value, essentially, not just here's my thesis. You want to read it? Like, that's not the way to sell myself. It's having things that are more tangible, showing that I can bring them value, because that's what they want when you're coming into a company. Anyone does. They want you to show that you can grow with them. You have value, you're adding to it, making them get higher. So I've learned so much from this conversation. And my last question is going to be, if people wanted to connect, or where can they find you?
So FoodGrads, Nicole, Veronica, all the wonderful FoodGrad ambassadors, they know where to find me. And so if you're connecting through FoodGrads, just say, hey, how can we find Amy? But I do have a really active role on LinkedIn, and I do sweep around and make lots of comments, all sorts of different social media platforms. I love the fact that working at the college, I'm given a lot of flexibility with my time, and I do a lot of active research, but I'm not quite as stressed as I would be if I was at a university. So I can go out and offer comments and mentor people and do lots of great fun stuff as well. Lovely. CIFST is also a great way to connect, and CIFST has had a mentorship program, and I know that a lot of people have reached out, and I've had some really awesome conversations with people through CIFST's mentorship program, and do take a look at what's being offered there.
For sure. And for anyone who's listening, I'll make sure to put everything in the show notes, so it'll be much easier to find all these amazing connections and places that you can find out about stuff that we talked about in this episode. So thank you again, Amy, for coming on the show. I loved this conversation, and I can't wait to share it with everyone.
Amazing. I am such a big fan of yours, Veronica, and I love to see how many wonderful things you've been doing to advocate for the sector. So I'm going to give you a virtual hug. You're awesome. You're awesome.
I think you are too. Thank you so much, Amy.
Take care. We'll talk soon.
Talk soon.
Thank you everyone so much for tuning in and listening to episode 11 of the FoodGrads podcast. All the show notes for this episode can be found by clicking the podcast tab on the FoodGrads website. There, you can find any past or future episodes of this podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, then please consider sharing it with your network. I would love to get the word about how great the food industry is and get more people excited about it. Also, don't forget to sign up for your free FoodGrads account. You can create your own searchable profile, which is in a niche area of the food industry. Include your skills, career aspirations, and multiple resumes tailored for different job opportunities, all focused on the food industry. Joining will connect you to an amazing network of food and beverage professionals, the next generation of food. With that, once again, I thank everyone so much for listening. I'll see you next week. Bye.